What was the best "you have no power here" moment you've ever seen? Story 1. We had an extremely power-hungry HR, human resources lady. She's walking around with the president of the company who flew in from Japan. She rushes him through the warehouse, just spits out, "Oh, these are the warehouse guys. We don't have to stop and talk to them." He stops, walks over and starts talking to me about my last vacation. How did buying my house go? You could just see her fuming behind him as we talked for almost 45 minutes. I've had multiple meetings with him. We knew each other really well. I don't think he liked her and dragged it out on purpose, but I was thrilled to see her just standing there bored as hell. Story 2. When I was working in customer service for a restaurant delivery service, not unlike DoorDash, I had a customer send in a complaint about hair in their food. The hair was sitting on top of the food. I checked their account, and they had one order on their account, which is a red flag. I checked their phone number and find multiple accounts, each with 1 to 2 orders, all of them complaining about hair in the food. I deny a refund because the customer has actually used the same photo for the last order since they ordered the same thing. The customer tries to argue with me and threatens to never use the service again. Typical stuff that they always say. Eventually, the customer gives up and ends the call, then immediately tries again. I get the support request, see who it is, then deny the refund again. She ends the call, then tries again. The person behind me gets the call. I tap the person on the shoulder and show them what I pulled up on my screen, and the person denies the refund. The next day, she calls back and tries again and is outside of the refund window, so the customer demands to speak to a supervisor. The supervisor bans her from the service for multiple fraudulent refund requests. Story 3. I worked for 8 years servicing communications equipment on site, and 5 of those years as the department manager. When oil was found in our area, we got so busy we could barely even think. Most of my team were pulling 12-plus-hour days 6 days a week. We were struggling to hire people quickly enough. One day, the CEO texted and said he hired an assistant manager for me, which was something I desperately needed. I was dirty as hell from my previous job and swung by the store to pick him up and take him to one of our sites where he would be doing paperwork. The moment he got in the truck, he immediately started talking. He started telling me about how everything we were doing is f***ed up and the department manager, who was me, was a total moron and who would have my job within a few months. I just sat and mostly listened. He obviously didn't know shit about my industry, and every time he would say something wrong, I would try to politely correct him, and he'd either backtrack or insist that I was trained wrong. When we got to the site, out in the middle of the West Texas desert, he complained about the layer of dust on everything and ordered me to clean up the entire site. When I sat down on my desk, the guy continued to beat my ear off about everything that was wrong. He chastised me for sitting down on my desk when he told me to clean up the site, filled out a notice of termination, and handed it to him. He looked absolutely shocked. Then he defiantly protested that only the CEO could fire him. I said, "And Mr. Brown, right?" He sheepishly nodded. So I stuck my hand out for a handshake and introduced myself. I can teach anyone how to service equipment, but I don't have a clue how to teach someone not to be an Story 4. A coworker friend of mine was flying back from a sales conference in Vegas when he was able to upgrade to a first-class seat. We had this sales VP that was on the same flight. She was the snobby, entitled type with a full-time nanny and giant McMansion in the suburbs, and she generally treated people who worked for her like servants. She sees him in a first-class seat as she's making her way to coach and asks him how he got that seat. He used points to upgrade. As people are getting settled in, she makes her way back up to the first-class cabin and asks to speak with the lead flight attendant. She tells him that one of her underlings is sitting in the first class and that she needs to switch with him since she's higher on the corporate ladder. The guy can't believe what he's hearing, but she won't take no for an answer. Finally, he tells her she has to go back to her seat or she'll be escorted from the plane. She made a complete of herself in front of the whole first-class cabin. Story 5. I had a rough childhood with a drug addict father. My mom struggled to make ends meet, and my first job was paying for the mortgage. After several months of working, again at my first job, I finally had some money to spend on myself and decided to get a computer and a decent internet connection. At the time, the best internet I could buy was part of a dish combo package. I bought a dish and brought it home to install in the house. During this time, my dad was still living at home with us, but he was hardly there, and my parents had all but separated at that point. My dad promptly asked me what I was doing, putting a dish in his house. I let him know that I pay the mortgage now and I make the decisions on what we do with the house. I was young, but it was a very empowering moment for me. I guess revenge is a dish best served in the side of the house. Story 6. One of my new employees came from a competitor who is, shall we say, not as put together as we are. Her former boss had actually called me to yell at me about poaching as consultants, which in and of itself is weird enough. However, a few weeks after she started, the dude rolled up to her office. He had apparently been calling her to get her to finish an analysis for him, and she just ghosted him. I went to the lobby to see what the f*** he was doing there. He started in on me again, and then she happened to walk by. I didn't fully understand the conversation, but at one point, he literally demanded she do this analysis. She just said, "Or what?" and waited for a few beats before turning on our heels and walking away. I did the old hand on his back pointing to the door universal symbol for leave or a large security man will make you leave. Never heard from him again. Story 7. I had an old boss who was a complete and total It was actually my boss's boss and wasn't supposed to interact with us unless it was through our boss, but he just loved trying to make everyone under him squirm. The company had forced him to go to training twice because of how he spoke to people. One day, I get a call at home from him and he just starts unloading, cursing, name-calling, and insulting over some technical issue he just found out about. After a couple of minutes, I just looked at my phone and hung up on him. The next day, I get called into a meeting with a boss who basically wants to know who the f*** I think I am hanging up on this guy. I calmly explain that no one gets to yell at me on my time, in my home, or in my phone. You have to wait for me to be on the clock to pay me for that privilege. And I'll gladly take the money. If I'm busy being yelled at, I'm not busy with anything else. Story 8. I was working as a consultant for a company, and there was a bit of a competition between me and this guy. The company started to have some financial issues, so I left and started working for a client of theirs. Shortly after joining, they brought in this guy. I was competing with at my old job. He was technically my equal, except now I was employed by the client and he was just a consultant. He was trying to one-up me during meetings, and my boss told him that decisions are made by the company, not the consultants. It felt good. Story 9. I worked at a Walmart as a cashier, and the assistant manager there was He would insult everybody working there and force us sometimes to do work above our pay grade. 6 months later, and I got transferred to another Walmart that was just built. They needed to pick a manager and assistant manager. They got some random manager, but I got the assistant manager. I guess all the complaints on the assistant manager basically gave him a demotion. So one day, he was ordering the other cashiers around, then I pulled him to the side and told him that if he kept pulling the same shit around, he would be out of here. I haven't heard anything from him since. Story 10. Sometime in the late 80s, I worked at a Walmart warehouse. There was a strict rule. If you didn't have your security badge, you could not get in the front door. One day, just behind me, an older fellow gets stopped by a loss prevention officer for no badge. One of my friends pokes me and points out that the LP guy just refused to let Sam Walton in the door. We all stopped to watch what we assumed was going to be a show. To his credit, Mr. Walton stops and goes back to his vehicle and gets his badge and thanks the LP guy for following the rules. Story 11. When I was in high school, I worked at a popular warehouse club selling computers on the weekends. I was hired by the store manager via a referral of a friend. I loved computers. They thought I'd make a good salesman. So my job was to stay in the computer department and sell computers. Nothing else. Well, one of the shift managers didn't like that and started to insist that I needed to go full clothes for a while, as in half my damn shift. I told him that the store manager had instructed me never to leave the technology department, but he insisted. This went on for several weeks. The store manager showed up one weekend where the both power-tripping shift manager and I were working. The store manager walks up with the shift manager close behind. The store manager slaps a stack of green bar paper, this was a while ago, down onto a shelf and points to some highlighted numbers. He looks at the shift manager and says, "Do you see this? These are our average technology sales numbers for the weeks you're on shift. See this number over here? This is our average technology sale numbers for weeks you're not. At this point, it would be more cost-effective for me to simply fire you. What do you think of that solution?" The guy stammers and stutters like a toddler caught bullying another kid on the playground. Fortunately, the dude wasn't fired, but the store manager made it clear that when I was on shift, I was not to leave the technology department unless I was on break or there was a fire in the store. That shift manager never said another word to me. Story 12. When I was still a child, I saw how my grandparents were to my parents when they used to stay in their house during their early years of marriage when they were broke. They're forced to accept the and swallow their pride, knowing that they're still indebted to them and have nowhere to go. Once they had enough money to leave my grandparents, they moved to a small rented house. My grandparents came for an unannounced visit and berated my dad for living in such a shanty house and how ungrateful he was for leaving their home. My dad was silent until they started blaming my mother for being a wife that brought bad luck to my dad and how she poisoned him into moving to a new home. My dad wasn't having any of their bile anymore and kicked them out. They stopped talking until my grandfather was dying of leukemia. My mom was the one who persuaded my dad to see him before he passed. Story 13. My job is right before my current one. Property manager. The owner was an absolute prick. He was heartless and rude and racist, and I loathed him. I hated every day going into that job, but I needed the money. I was applying daily to my dream company in hopes that eventually I'd be accepted. In the meantime, every time I complained or mentioned something to my supervisor, I was told to shut up and get on with it. He was paying me too much to have opinions. 3 years later, we were a small office and the receptionist and assistant prop managers had quit. I finally got accepted into my dream company and happily put in my 2-week notice. In desperation, he offered me more money, a higher position, and better benefits, which were laughable. When I said no, he asked why. I have never felt more gleeful than the moment when I said, "I don't know. I'm not paid to have opinions here." That was a year ago, and even now the look on his stupid old face gives me joy to this day. This was a very brief summarized version, and yes, he did remember saying it to me. He told me I was being too sensitive and should take more money. I've kept in touch with my awesome supervisor, and in a year since I left, the position has yet to be filled. Everyone keeps quitting because they can't work with someone like him. Story 14. A few years ago, I interviewed for a job in the United States that was labeled as a senior level position, which is my level of experience in this field. I went through 2 phone interviews and a stellar in-person interview. Shortly after the in-person interview, they called me and said they absolutely loved me and that I would be a great fit at the company. However, they thought I was a little too green, implying I was inexperienced for the senior level position. But lucky for me, they have an opening for the junior level position at a salary decrease. I kindly told them that the reason I applied to their job posting in the first place was that it was a senior level position and that I wasn't going to take a step backward in my career by taking a junior level position, since I had both the appropriate experience and the work history. I also let them know that trying to trick someone with senior level experience into taking a junior level position by stringing them along through interviews and a job offer was deceptive and unethical. There was silence over the phone for a moment, and then the interviewer said in an offended tone, "Well, we've all had to make sacrifices for Brent Company." To which I replied, "You may have had to, but I don't make sacrifices for anyone." Stunned silence. Then the interviewer, who was so appalled that they didn't know what to say, replies, "Well, maybe you can think about it, and I'll call you tomorrow to check in." I said, "No, thank you, and please don't call me," and hung up on the phone. They do this a lot to young female people like myself in a variety of industries. Don't take it from anybody. Know your qualifications, believe in them. Your talents will be appreciated and paid for elsewhere, I promise you. The industry I'm in is marketing, and I'm currently a senior graphic designer. Story 15. I have one that crosses with, "I don't work here, lady," a bit. I have a job, but I will still do interviews every couple of years. This means the script is flipped a bit. They have to convince me to work there. Anyway, I got to the town early, so I stopped at a bakery to get something to eat. The woman went in the back to get it, and this squat-toed of a woman walks in, yells at me to get her order, then yells at me again for not getting up right away to serve her. When I point out that I do not work there, she goes off on me about how important she is, etc. We can skip the play-by-play. I went to the interview, the head of IT and the toad woman walk in. She has this evil grin on her face. I stop everything. I point at the toad woman and say something like, "I have seen how your management treats people, and I have no interest in working for you." And I take my resume out of his hands and walk out. The look on her face was priceless. Oh, and he had walked in with a print of a resume, so I took his copy. Felt great to do. Story 16. I work at a hotel. It's high-end, so we often take the approach of just appeasing guests no matter what. So I frequently have to bite my tongue. However, we have a very desirable parking lot, and when people poach it, we boot them. I love enforcing these because I don't have to bite my tongue or apologize, as they aren't guests. My favorite one was this. Girl parks and walks to the neighboring hotel. Our general manager happens to be in the lot and says, "Hey, just an FYI. This is parking for Sun Hotel, not Moon Hotel." She proceeds to say, "F*** you," flips him off and walks into the neighboring hotel. General manager calls me and tells me. I giggle, grab the boot and slap it on the car. She comes back screaming and ranting. I told her the cost is $200. She calls the police. The police ask, "Is this a private lot?" "Yes." "Okay, then pay them." She refuses to pay and storms off. I get a call requesting the manager. I speak with him. It's the girl's mom. She's trying to say, "Oh, my daughter didn't know. She was for a job interview. Yada yada." I let her go on, and when she finally stops making excuses, I tell her that her daughter flipped off the general manager and there's no way the boot is coming off without payment. On top of that, I tell her when she pays, she better not come in swearing or yelling, or the price goes up to $300. She hangs up and the daughter comes back and silently hands me $200, with a look of rage on her face. I have never been so internally giggly before. Story 17. I worked in management at a theater for a while. If the concession counter was slammed and I was able, I'd leave my post and help them sling popcorn. One night while helping out, a particularly belligerent man started cussing out a 16-year-old girl on a cash register for being too slow, even suggesting she quit, since she clearly couldn't handle pushing buttons or scooping popcorn. It was pretty disgusting, and I felt so bad for the girl. I stepped in and told the guy that our employees have the right to refuse service to customers who harass them, as part of our anti-harassment and discrimination policy, empathized that the lines were longer than usual, and suggested he should apologize and move on. He was pissed, left half of his order on the counter and started fuming off. Anticipating his next move, I went back to my original post that night as manager of the customer service kiosk. Oh boy, the look on his face when he saw me. Didn't want a refund of his tickets though, so I assume he watched the movie, without popcorn. Story 18. I was about 12 years old, maybe younger. Often had been forced to stay with my mom's friends when she'd go out of town. The father was an prick. He'd do things like make tomatoes every night for dinner, knowing I absolutely hated them. For a week. Threw me in a pool when I was small and he knew I couldn't swim. Classic 70s macho man. He literally tortured me every chance he'd get. As an aside, if you're a kid and your own mother doesn't give a shit how people treat you, it's pretty much open season. Anyway, we went out to dinner one night. Me, my mom, her friends, and their kids. We were leaving the restaurant. I don't remember what preceded it, but he said, "Go ahead, tough guy. Hit me as hard as you can right in the gut." Thinking I wouldn't do it because I was scared of him. But this was my moment and I knew it. He was a small man, 5'6". I was at least as tall as him already. And as he gave me his eating grin, I pulled my fist back and belted him in the gut with every ounce of strength I could muster. He immediately doubled over. He was pissed. He tried to turn it around on me, but his wife shut him up instantly. "You told him to do it. If you weren't ready, it's your fault, not his." One of the most satisfying moments of my life, and one of the last times I had to endure Mr. Tough Guy. Story 19. My normally very sweet, supportive mother was a terror to drive with when I was on my learner's permit. She'd scream, shout, brace herself against the dash. It's got to a point where I'd jump anytime she made any sudden movements while I was driving, because I thought she was going to scream at me. In my early 20s, I got the first car that I bought myself, paid insurance on, and the like. I was driving through a construction zone and she tried her usual thing. When I told her to knock it off, she said, "I can do what I want," basically. I said, "Not in my car. I'm done with you acting this way. If you don't knock it off, I'm going to drop you off at the next stop and Dad can pick you up." My dad was following us in my parents' car, so I wasn't ditching her. She'd just be transferring cars. After that, it all stopped. She may be doing it in her head, but she doesn't do it on the outside anymore. The fuck of it all is, now that I'm a pretty experienced driver, I can tell you she's one of the worst drivers I've ever ridden with.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out this next video. The YouTube algorithm really thinks you like it.